Section 8.6, Applications, Distance, Rate, Time, Interest, and Average. In this video, we're going to be working on solving distance, rate, and time problems using linear equations. We're going to look at simple interest problems with linear equations. We're going to solve some average problems and some cost problems using linear equations. A motorist averaged 45 miles per hour for the first part of a trip and 54 miles per hour for the last part of a trip. If the total trip was 303 miles and it took 6 hours, what was the time for each part? So what we've done is we've constructed a table here. Since we're doing a distance, rate, time problem, remember that our formula is distance equals rate times time. So we've got a column for rate and a column for time, and if we multiply those together, we get distance. For the first part of the trip, we know his rate was 45 miles per hour. For the second part of the trip, it was 54 miles per hour. We know that the total trip, which would be the distance, so this total of those two parts would be 303, and we know that the total time, so this would be 6 hours. So what I need to do is find the time for each part that he was traveling. Let's call one of the times X. Doesn't matter which one we select, we're going to make this part X. Then the second part of his trip, if the first part took X amount of time, the second part would have to take 6 minus X. In terms of numbers, let's say the first trip or part of the trip took 2 hours, then the second part would take 6 minus 2, which would be 4 hours. And if the first part took 5 hours, then the second part would take 6 minus 5, which would be 1 hour. Now, the distance, to get distance, remember that we multiply rate times time. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply these together, and this will give me 45x, and this will give me 54 times 6 minus x. But now, knowing that the total trip was 303 miles, I can make the equation 45x plus 54 times 6 minus x has to give me 303 miles total. Now let's take our equation and work through solving. So remember that the first thing we're going to want to do is distributive property. So we'll take 54 times 6, and that's going to give me 324. And then 54 times negative x will give me negative 54x equals 303. Now I'll combine like terms. I have a 45 and a negative 54. Well, that's negative 9x plus 324 equals 303. Now we'll subtract our 324 and get negative 9x equals negative 21, and then we'll divide by negative 9. So that's going to give us that x would be negative 21 divided by negative 9 would actually simplify to 7/3, or you could use your calculator and get an answer, and this ends up being 2 1/3 hours. So for the first part of his trip, he used 2 1/3 hours. For the second part, remember, our other time was 6 minus x. So that would be 6 minus 2 1/3, which would be 3 2/3. Or if we remember that an hour is 60 minutes, 2 1/3 hours would be 2 hours, and a third of an hour would be 20 minutes. For the 45 miles per hour, he traveled for 2 hours and 20 minutes. And then when he was traveling 54 miles an hour, he traveled 3 hours and 40 minutes. In example 2, we're looking at another simple interest problem. We have that Kara has $40,000 that she's going to invest. So that's going to be my principal. She's going to invest it for 1 year. Some of it's going into a savings account that pays 7% interest, and the rest of it goes into a stock that pays 12%. If her interest income last year was $3,550, how much did she have in each of those two accounts? Let's fill in what we know. We know the savings account pays 7%, so we'll go ahead and make that 0.07, and that the stock makes 12%, so that's 0.12. We know the total amount of money she invested was $40,000. It wasn't $40,000 in each one, but the total was $40,000. And we know her total interest that she made was $3,550. $550. Since I don't know anything about my principal, I'm going to call one of those accounts X. So we'll make the savings account X. So the amount of money I invested in the stocks would have to be $40,000 minus X. So again, in terms of numbers, think of it this way. If she put $10,000 in savings, then she would put $40,000 minus $10,000, which would be $30,000 in the stocks account. Now, to get our interest, remember we do principal times rate. Normally it's principal times rate times time, but our time is 1 year, so that's why we don't have to worry about it. So if I multiply the interest or the principal and the rate, I get 0.07x for my first account, and then 0.12 times 40,000 minus x for my second account. But the combined interest income was $35.50. If I add the amount of interest she got from savings plus the amount of interest that she got from the stock account, I know that I've got to get $35.50. Now we can solve this equation. So let's go ahead and do distributed property first. 0.12 times 40,000 will give me 4,800. And 0.12 times negative x would give me negative 0.12x. Now we'll combine our like terms. We have two terms that are x's, so we'll take our 0.07x and our negative 0.12x, combine those, and get negative 0.05x plus 4,800 would equal 35.50. Now we'll subtract the 4,800. Gotta be very careful about our signs. Divide by negative 0.05. And I get that x is going to be 25,000. Well, look back at your table. X is the amount in savings. So in savings, I'm going to put $25,000. And in stocks, remember, we took 40,000 minus how much we put in a savings account, and that would give me 15,000 in our stock account. Our next problem actually involves something that you may have done before, trying to figure out what test score you might have to have a certain average at the end of a term. We have 4 scores of 85, 92, 82, and 88 on 4 tests. We want to know what score would we need on a 5th test to have an average of 90. Well, remember that when we're finding the average or the mean, we add up all of our values. So 85 plus 92 plus 82 plus 88 plus x, which is going to be my 5th score. So that's going to be, x is going to stand for my 5th test score. But to find the average, we add up all those scores and we divide by how many there were, which there would be 5 tests. And I want that to come out to be 90. Now let's just solve that equation. So I'm going to go ahead and combine these 4 scores at the top, add that together, and you're going to get 347 plus x divided by 5 equals 90. Now I'm going to solve that by multiplying by 5 and get 347 plus x equals 450. Then we'll subtract 347. And when I do, I get x is 103. Now, if we assume that our test cannot have a score more than 100, then it's going to be impossible for us to average a 90. And if a 90 is an A, then the only way we can have an A is if our next test score has bonus so that we could get more than 100%. For example 4, we're going to look at a retail example, and this is probably the most confusing example we're going to go over. We know that a jeweler paid $350 for a ring. He wants to price the ring for sale so that he gives a 30% discount on the marked selling price, and he still makes up 20% of his cost. What should be the marked selling price of the ring? And we need to remember that the selling price minus the cost gives me the profit. You actually have two different selling prices here you need to worry about. The marked selling price and then the actual selling price. Once he gives the discount, what would the actual selling price be? So we're going to start with the fact that we know that the cost of the ring was $350. We also know that he wants to make 20% profit on his cost. So the profit is 20%, 0.20, times 350, which if I work that out, I get $70. So he's wanting to make a $70 profit off this ring. Well, let's let X be the marked price. The marked selling price. Now the actual price he's going to sell it for is going to be the original price minus 30% of that price. So it's his original marked price minus the 30% of that. And that's how we're going to figure out his actual price. So when I use this, selling price minus cost equals profit, this is what I want to use for my selling price. So if I take X minus 0.30X, think of that as 1X, minus 0.30x, and when I do, that's going to give me 0.70x. So if I take 0.70x minus the cost, which was $350, I want that to equal the profit of $70. Once we get to this part, it's actually a pretty easy problem to solve. We're going to add 350 to both sides and get 0.70x equals 420, and then we'll divide by 0.70 and get that X would be 600. That should be my marked cost, not my actual cost or actual selling price. That should be my marked price.